Hello, good evening. I'm Jill Featherstone, Senior Director of Education here at the Des Moines Arts Center, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight on the occasion of the 33rd Fingerman Lecture at the Des Moines Arts Center, and introduce this evening's honored guest, Hank Willis Thomas. As we commence tonight's program, I want to begin by acknowledging the extraordinary gift of this lecture series by Lois Fingerman and the late Dr. Louis Fingerman. Established in 1986 with Leonard Baskin as the first speaker, this series has featured an impressive list of scholars and critics, including Arthur Danto, Simon Schama, Roberta Smith, and eminent artists including Kiki Smith, Frank Stella, Jeff Koons, Maya Lin, and Theaster Gates. Regretfully, Lois is not able to join us this evening, but please join me in a round of applause and thanks to the Fingerman family for this gift. I'd also like to recognize Krause Group as a valued partner in making tonight's lecture possible, so thank you to our friends from Krause Group. And this evening, we have the good fortune of being in the deft hands of Dr. Kelly Baum. And if you haven't met her yet, I'm so happy you're here tonight. Dr. Baum is in her 7th month here at the Des Moines Arts Center as the John and Mary Pappajohn Director, and she's serving as the 12th director of this institution. With a focus on art, education, and scholarship, Dr. Baum has worked as a curator of modern art and contemporary art for 23 years, holding positions at 4 civic and university art museums: the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Princeton University Art Museum, the Blanton Museum of Art at the University of Texas at Austin, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. Dr. Baum holds a PhD in art history and an MA in art history, both from the University of Delaware, and was a fellow at the Center for Curatorial Leadership. And on behalf of my colleagues at the Des Moines Arts Center, I can say that we are very happy to have Kelly leading our beloved organization and are inspired by her energy, her resolve, and most importantly, we're looking forward to filling out her vision. So thank you, Kelly. And of course, Dr. Baum will be joined on stage by this year's Medal of Arts recipient, Hank Willis Thomas. Mr. Thomas was born in 1976 in Plainfield, New Jersey, and currently lives and works in New York City. He received his BFA from New York University, MFA from California College of the Arts, and honorary doctorates from the Maryland Institute of Art and the Institute for Doctoral Studies in the Visual Arts in Portland, Maine. His work is exhibited in major art museums worldwide, and his practice includes many significant installations in public spaces. In his recent work with the Peabody Award-winning series Art 21, many of you are probably fans, Art in the 21st Century, Mr. Thomas divulged that as a child he was told he stared too much and asked too many questions. Today, these are the very attributes that shape his artistic practice, which pivots on the themes of perspective. He says, "All of my work is about framing and context. Depending on where you're standing, it really shapes your perspective of the truth, of reality, and of what's important." So I know we are all excited to hear more about this evening. So please help me welcome Hank Willis Thomas and Dr. Kelly Baum.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, Hank.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Joining us, flying out. Hank is in a different city every day this week. I think he was in a different city every day next week and the week after. This man is busy. So we're thrilled to have Hank here. Unbelievably, today is the first day I am meeting Hank for the first time. We lived together lived in New York. That would surprise several people in our lives if that were true. But we both lived in New York for 8 years. And ironically, I'm meeting Hank for the first time here in Des Moines, Iowa at the Arts Center. So anyway, this is a real privilege for me. And I'm going to get us started. Hank told me actually that he selected this opening slide, and am I allowed to say this, in honor of Lois Fingerman. I had to share. So when I was pondering this conversation with Hank, selfishly I was able to shape it, send it in a direction that most interested me, but it's a direction that I think will resonate with all of you, and really this direction is prominent in so many aspects of Hank's work. So I wanted to really focus tonight on the emphatically public-facing side of your practice, emphasizing your relationship to the public, stakeholders, participants, collaborators, viewers. The public means many things to you. Your work's relationship to public spaces, especially the places your work occupies, those extra artistic sites. You won't only see Hank's work in galleries and museums. In some cases, you might be more apt to find it out in the world, on the side of a road in a public park. And then finally, your use of public images, your tendency to reclaim and appropriate images that circulate in the public realm. And so the public, the idea of the public in all of its myriad forms really is the organizing principle, I thought would make good organizing principle of this discussion. I hope that I will not talk too much. I really am hoping to prompt Hank to open up, although he's already warned me that he plans to ask me questions, not about his work, unfortunately, but about my own work here. So this might end up being a two-way interview. So we are starting with some very recent works that Hank debuted in his 2023 exhibition at Pace Gallery in Los Angeles. They're from his Retroflective series, a series that has been ongoing for many years. The series is incredible, the way it works, the way it plays with the eye, the demands that it makes on the viewer. I also I've always been very intrigued by the title. I think of that title, Retroflective, as a thing, a noun, but also an operation, a process, whose material is time and history. And so I wonder if you could begin by telling us about the works that we see on the screen now.
Sure, actually, it's just one work. It's two different images.
Two views.
But it's really just great to be here. Congratulations on leading this incredible institution. I'm looking forward to coming back when the building, the Meyer building is reopened. The collection is amazing, and I haven't been in a more beautiful theater. So it's really great to be here and seeing so many beautiful faces as well. Yeah, so this is a work of mine called I've Known Rivers. It's actually 8 by 20 feet. And the top image is what it looks like to the naked eye. And what I did to make this image is digitally collage an image of, well, not digitally collage an image by Aaron Douglas of a figure laying by the river. And then actually, it's a great place because just above us, there is the Liechtenstein pyramid, one of the pyramid paintings. And I've always been really interested in kind of the past and the present, how different artists are dealing with different or similar issues. And so we see pyramids and then industrial buildings in the top left corner of the image of Aaron Douglas, and the figure here is actually a portrait that he made of Langston Hughes for his first publication, the African American poet Langston Hughes. And the first thing he ever published was his poem, I've Known Rivers. And so the theme of my show was really thinking a lot about Langston Hughes' poem and thinking about the Mississippi River, the Nile River, and all of the stories that kind of go along the river and the river of time. And if you take a flash photograph or you see it from a specific angle, you'll start to see that actually this collage is made up of hundreds of other images. And I've invented a process of collaging using this vinyl called retroreflective vinyl, which is a material we see every day on stop signs and one-way signs. And the way that it works at night, which most of you will see going home, is the headlights of your car illuminate something that would normally not be lit. And there's something for me about looking at history with this retroreflective material that I think is really, but you used a great term. What'd you just say? You said something about using the material of time.
Using time and history as materials. But this is the retroreflective material, the process. It does something to time and history.
Yeah.
Works on it.
Yes. Hopefully.
Like that? I don't know.
Yeah, hopefully you'll write.
Someone's recording this, so.
Yeah, and then hopefully you'll write about it too. So this is just one work from the show, and the next, I think there's about 3 other pieces from that show. Another one.
A detail.
Beautiful, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a detail of that work, and then this is another work from that series.
And this series also sets up another recurring theme in your work, which is the necessary presence and intervention of a viewer. And so for one of these retroreflectives to reveal its other self, it needs a viewer to stand in front of it, and it requires that viewer to do something with their own camera.
Or yeah, by literally shining a light on it from their own perspective, and 2 people can be looking at the very same image and seeing and taking away very different things. And so there's what lies beneath the surface is something that I've always been kind of mesmerized by. The fact that each of us has an identity, like whatever you guys are looking at, but I have no idea what you're looking at. Like I can't see myself. And so am I what you see, or am I, or are you me? Is one of the many questions that I think about a lot, and this work tries to get at some of the kind of double layers in multiple ways of seeing that I kind of navigate on it, or I guess we all navigate on a daily basis.
I love the name retroreflective because it suggests to me this hyper kind of super awareness, a kind of super consciousness in which you're not just aware, you're extra aware, and so your senses are heightened, your consciousness is heightened, and I associate that with enlightenment, just the process of kind of coming to understanding of yourself and the world.
I love it. Do I even need to say anything?
Let's see.
Do you think she should just keep talking? I'll just.
No. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that.
Oh.
So another retroreflective from the exhibition at Pace, and here we are. We're going back in time to a very potent image photograph from 2003, Branded Head.
Yeah. So this is one of my very first kind of what I would say successful artworks from 2003. I was really thinking about then how we live in an age of branded consciousness, about how many of the things that we know about ourselves or share about ourselves, whether it be through the cars we drive or the clothes we wear, or now the social media or the phone that we use, we're part of the first generation of human beings whose identity is actually channeled in large part through someone else's story, this brand, and being a person of African descent whose ancestors were brought here as slaves, and likely some of them were branded as a sign of ownership. I really am also thinking about what it means now when I brand myself, whether it be for my own personal gain or by just using Instagram, which I'm not on right now. But or using anything that teaches me how to navigate the world through a corporate agenda.
And there's another work from the series here, Absolute Power from 2003.
And this work I think advertising is the most effective and ubiquitous language in the world, and I like to use the language of advertising to talk about things that advertising couldn't responsibly speak about. So this work, Absolute Power, is also thinking about, it's referencing the popular Absolute Vodka campaign, but also thinking about, this is a representation in part of the slave ship Brooks in 1787, And this was to show how slaves were packaged into ships. And I was thinking a lot about the construction of race and how this idea that you can take people from this huge continent of Africa with thousands of different cultures and millions of people across this huge continent, kidnap them, package them in ships and tell them they're all the same, and then literally create a race, because 500 years ago in Africa there were no black people, there were just people. And so the idea that I now am living through this kind of branded identity that was made to dehumanize me is, I think, a representation of the absolute power of storytelling.
And there's something so emphatic about these early works, so immediate in their impact, very readable, very legible, and super incisive.
Oh yeah, that's my part. I love this part.
Oh, this is.
Oh yeah.
Are you okay?
Well, this is like.
We've not choreographed this.
Not choreographed this.
Yeah, we're just going with the flow.
But when I did the unbranded series, the branded series, I did another series after that called Unbranded Reflections in Black by Corporate America, because I started to find real ads that were kind of looking at black identity from 1960s to that time, 2008, and removing the advertising information because I realized that truth is better than fiction. And then I started to come up with I saw other ads sometimes, especially in the 70s, featuring quote-unquote white women, and I was really kind of fascinated with that. And so I started another series called Unbranded, A Century of White Women, 1915 to 2015, because this idea of a quote-unquote white identity is something that has always been morphing. 100 years ago, German people wouldn't have been white, Russian people wouldn't have been white. Anybody who identified as Jewish or Greek or Spanish or Armenian or maybe even Irish would not be considered white. And so, but it was, for many immigrants, Italian Americans, it was a passport towards being accepted and being seen as a whole human being. And I was really kind of also interested in tracking through advertisements these kind of the little moments of evolution. And so this is the part I get giddy about, because advertising is never really about the product. It's about what ideas you can attach to a product through this kind of language that we've been trained to understand the world and accept. So I ask you all, what is this an ad for? Anybody have ideas? Some smart people here. It's an ad from 1958 or 59. Soft shoes, what? Golf? Insurance? No. Yes, sweaters, actually. And so this is the original ad. Can you read this ad text?
Oh, you want me to read it? Men are better than women. Indoors, women are useful, even pleasant. On a mountain, they are something of a drag. So don't go hauling them up a cliff just to show off your Drummond climbing sweaters. And so on and so forth, yeah.
This was an ad in Esquire magazine when some people here probably were alive, when my mom was a little girl. And this was how you sold sweaters to men, by putting women's lives in danger. You wonder what was happening in the workplace, where women were finally beginning to get little opportunities to go to work and to do things outside of the house. And this was partially a signifier of kind of what could happen to them if they tried to step too far out of line. And so I started to really, another one, this was, to me, the creepiest one, from 1947. So I think about myself as a visual culture archaeologist. So you saw that in the other work that we showed. Anybody want to guess? Close. Okay, maybe. Wait. Yeah, you got to read this.
Perfume and parabolics. During the war, the Springs Cotton Mills was called upon to develop a special fabric for camouflage. It was used in the Pacific to conceal ammunition dumps and gun emplacements. Let's see, this process has been patented. The fabric, which is impregnated with a permanent odor of hibiscus, hydrangea, and old rubber boots. This is now available to the false bottom and bust bucket business.
So this is a material, this is 1947, this is a material that was developed during the war to camouflage things in bushes. And it's been impregnated with an odor of, what's it say, the odor of hibiscus?
Hydrangeas and old boots.
To cover, I guess, bad smells. And you look at the men who are like watching this woman there and they're smelling roses as she lifts her legs. This is 1947. I've been so kind of like this, most of the art that we see in public space is advertising. And so I've always been really compelled to look at what we're consuming because this is a large part of our subconscious. And we don't even recognize the messages that are being told, the stories that are being told, that what we're imbibing and then what we're passing on. And so that's something that I kind of come back to throughout my work.
And when you use the word unbranded to describe the series, does that refer to the process of removing the typographic information? But do you also think about it in terms of liberating the image from its original kind of meaning?
If I was as smart as you, I would. So yes, I totally unbranded.
I see how this is
I
going.
wanted to liberate the meaning. But no, for a lot of, this is another thing I learned through my work, is that a lot of times there's things, people ask me questions, even what I said about the absolute power work, that's because someone asked me a question with an answer in it that I was like, yes, that is exactly what I was thinking about. So one of the few things that artists normally don't often get to be in conversation with their audience, but I often see the people who look at my work as my focus group, and they can see things and share things with me that I'm not even conscious of, because a lot of times as artists, and there's so much great work that it's coming, we're not making it, it's just coming through us. And when it gets out into the world, we can start to see the greater context, the greater meaning, especially when smart people write and talk about it. So don't be shy about it. You got a PhD, so.
Everyone's here to listen to you talk, not me. So, but I do want to say one last thing, actually, before I move on, is just that one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this series here at the Art Center is because I appreciated so much its focus on white feminine identity. I feel like white femininity the ideology of white femininity is so omnipresent, it's everywhere, but it's also invisible, in part because it just seems so natural. And what this series does is make it, profoundly unnatural and unfamiliar. It kind of attaches it to the politics. It really makes us see whiteness and femininity.
Can we go back to I think one of the examples of it? So there are 101 images in the series. And so like 1927, that's eye cream, and then 1940 something, that's like the carrot is a Baum, which is for a vacuum cleaner, I think. Rosie the Riveter is like right 45 or something like that, and then soon after, the war is over, and so she's in the workplace and she's like in a straitjacket, which you can see the messages. In the 1960s, the men are having their way with her to sell pants. And so now she's training, in the 70s, she's training her daughter to be like her. And in 1982, I think the movie Mr. Mom. So now the dad is taking care of the child. And then in 2007 or something, now he's pregnant and she's not. So there's you can see a huge evolution. And so they really you can track kind of the politics of the time through this project. But that's crazy, right? The Spring Made one? That's just crazy.
This one? Oh, yeah, no, it's awful.
Just imagine being in the boardroom and trying to figure out how to tell this story. Create this image and being like, that's it.
Yeah. With these two clown figures in the back, I know, it's hard to look at. Duality, bronze. And so we're moving into some images of your sculptures for public spaces. And so there's a lot to say about each individual piece. What I've noticed is and this is not going to be a brilliant revelation, but it might be useful for the audience, the focus on the body, the focus on arms and hands, the kind of cropping, fragmentation of the body, but also consistent symbols around uplift and aspiration. So many of your figures, whether whole or part, often part, they're reaching, they're striving. And for me, there's the impression of trying to escape or trying to move. So can you tell us a little bit about this work, Duality, or others I can also forward?
Yeah, well, maybe you can look. So this is Duality. It's actually stainless steel from 2023, and then there's a couple others. Oh well. So actually, I'll put context to this. Is one of my, I guess technically my largest public sculpture. I've interested in like symbols like this, which can mean peace or victory. It can mean something else depending on the context. How everything has multiple readings and how there's so much in the balance of communication. And so a lot of my sculptures are about gestures and kind of the multiple readings of gestures, but also the intention of any gesture to actually convey and to connect with someone, even if it is to challenge or to insult something. There's really this desire to connect. But I've also really, in other work of mine that I don't think we're showing too much of, is I've always thought about sports as a metaphor for well, especially the way that the ball functions in sports. It's a metaphor for what we do with the present moment. There's this way in which when you're watching a soccer game or a basketball game, the whole thing is about what the ball is the now, and where the ball is and who's holding the ball is actually kind of taking everything they have and putting it towards a goal. And in team sports, that's actually even more fascinating. But I also started to think about totems and fetishes, and kind of how, in a way, the stadiums are temples of our time, and how athletes are titans. And so I wanted to make sculptures that like kind of reference that.
And this is a reference to, the title is also a reference to the Brancusi sculpture.
Yes.
Yep. References to.
Is there a Brancusi sculpture up? No,
in this we have one in the collection.
And this is Strike from, I think, 2021, and it's a 10-foot stainless steel sculpture inspired by, often my work is kind of referencing work from the past, as you mentioned, in art history, and putting it in a new context. And this is based off of a Louis Lozovic print that's in the Whitney collection of strike busters, and this person who's trying to break up a strike, and with a baton, and another person is grabbing that person by the wrist. And I really wanted to kind of make a sculpture that kind of speaks to that moment.
We'll look at images of Hank's very recent sculpture called The Embrace, which was installed in Boston. And I thought of it because, as here, that moment of contact between two forms, a kind of act of touching, in this case grabbing, becomes so important and powerful. I also note that the stainless steel, the way it reflects light and captures shadow, even color, the surface acts almost like a camera, and it becomes very abstract as a result. I mean, it has a sort of liquid quality, kinetic quality, super responsive to the environment, but it's also radically dematerialized.
And there's also reflection again in that.
And so I would imagine that you would see yourself very clearly, or somewhat clearly, as a viewer in the steel too. And there's that moment of connection.
And there's a great Klaus Oldenburg sculpture that I saw downtown, and when I was in Philadelphia as a child, there's a clothespin. There are about 3 Klaus Oldenburg sculptures that are in downtown Philadelphia that were really influential to me as a child, because I I didn't understand why there was a 40-foot clothespin. And only later that I understand this art and that it had this kind, he was dealing with quotidian objects, and that there was like this kind of taking of the everyday and putting it in monumental space, in public space, to make us think about those things, those things differently. And when I go back to my childhood, I think about my hair, when I had hair, and how my hair was coiffed, which was with an Afro pick in Philadelphia. And I remember looking at the pick and looking at the fist on the pick and being like, is that like, why is there a fist on this thing that like is that because you have to make a fist to pick your hair? But I didn't realize that for much later that actually for a black person in America to make themselves beautiful in their eyes was an act of self-empowerment and solidarity. And that was something that was a part of the everyday experiences that's never really put into public space. And so I've made probably 7 different Afropic sculptures and put them up in, I think the first one in London, this is in DC. I started to really think about public space as you can see, I've really been kind of always engaged in conversations with the images that we see in public space. And so, did you want to go to the next one, or yeah?
Oh, well, I was going to ask about or not ask, but just mention the peace symbol that's embedded in this that you see here, and then the fist too. Was the fist an image that was added to the Afropic during the Black Power movement? Because the Afropic was also, I mean, it appears in a lot of photographs from that period. It is associated, I guess, symbolically with the Black Power movement for the reasons that you described. So I also associate the fist with that moment in history and politics and.
Right, because the patent is from the 70s. Okay. I think there are people with Italian-seeming names on it.
Oh, really? But is it appropriated by? Maybe it's appropriated by the Black Power movement.
I mean, I think it was all part of that moment. It's just like this is like Black Power. The fist is solidarity. Having natural hair that's big is also a gesture of strength. But thinking about how like the tool that we use to make our hair look the way we want it being something that actually is embedded in a political symbol, imbued with a political symbol, is something that I think was, and then they had peace signs in them, and so there was like this really multi-layered, multifunctional comb.
And so many of your works travel. They're very, they hit the road, they move from place to place, and I think of them as objects in motion. And when you design a sculpture like All Power to All People, when it relocates, how much, if any, does the design change? How site-specific is this particular iteration, or are they?
Yeah, well, this one actually, and I think there's an earlier image of it. It was first, it's 28 feet, and it was can you go back two slides, I think, to that?
This one just has,
oh, we don't have that. Yeah. Oh, darn it. Yeah, that one, yeah. So this was, the first place that this one was installed was at Burning Man in Black Rock Desert, and it was designed for people to climb up inside it. And there was like a soundtrack and all these things, and so it's a very unique work because it's an interactive public sculpture, and so we've taken it to 10 different cities, I think, and it's really been amazing because all of the programming that's been with it. But then the other ones are around 9 feet tall.
Yeah. So they do evolve, and the programming evolves depending on the space. So now we're at Four Freedoms. And it's a collaboration, a project, a movement that I wanted to spend some time talking about. Can you walk us through the history of Four Freedoms, how it came to be, and then we'll show images of works that were kind of developed via collaborators in Four Freedoms.
I struggle a lot with the way that the media kind of takes stories and manipulates our everything with them. it's so easy for me to get swept up into a political agenda or perspective based off of very savvy storytelling. What I love about being an artist is that there are a lot of things that I thought I hated until I kind of was invited by someone to look at it anew. And that at its best, the way that art functions in society is it challenges us to think critically about what we're looking at and to look deeper and ask questions of ourselves, of the past and of the present through these objects. And I think that art in public space should do that. And so in early 2016 or 2015, so before our last president was running for president, we thought, my friend Eric Gottesman and I thought it would be really exciting to try to find a way to put critical discourse into political discourse through fine art thinking. And we thought that we could do that in multitude of ways, but using the work that happens in artist studios and putting it out into the world as advertisements. This one was actually made collectively with Wyatt Gallery and John Santos. And it was put out in 2016 in Pearl, Mississippi. And it's a picture taken by Spider Martin on what became known as Bloody Sunday, where the Alabama State Troopers on Highway 80 at the Edmund Pettus Bridge faced down these nonviolent protesters who were marching from Selma to Alabama for voting rights. And I thought that it was astounding that the brutality of this state on people, in the name of the state, on people who were asking for liberty and justice for all, was something that was really just disturbing. But the fact that these people, many times young people, but they were young people, old people of every ethnicity, chose, in spite of the brutality that they were certain to face, to stand in love and dignity and nonviolence, and to teach the states about humanity through their collective action was something that I thought I was very inspired by. And so I was, in the 2016 campaign, where like $2 billion were spent on this campaign, and the most popular slogan was "Make America Great Again," but no one asked when, the most obvious question to me, which was, when was America greater than it is today? Like greater for more Americans than it is today. And I would say there never was a time when America was greater for more Americans than there is today. But if you did try to make that argument, maybe you could talk about the specific small window of the civil rights movement where everyday and ordinary disenfranchised citizens stood up to, and through their grace and through their courage, put a mirror to the country and challenged it to change. And so what was funny, the next slide, when it was put up, this is my favorite headline of all time, because CNN loves to they're like, so-and-so slams so-and-so, and so-and-so rips so-and-so, and to have this kind of reflective headline where it's like, Mississippi residents unsure of controversial billboard's intent, is like, that's the perfect sweet spot of any artwork, where you're like, it's controversial, I know that. And so we continue to, in various ways, to try to put work in public space that did that. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail, but I think art is meant to do that.
And tell us about the origin of the name Four Freedoms.
I was very much inspired by Norman Rockwell's paintings inspired by FDR's famous speech where he said everyone was entitled to four basic freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from fear, and freedom from want. He gave that speech on January 6, 1941 in the United States Capitol. So 80 years later, that date took on a very different meaning. And I think it means even something different today. But I was really inspired by this idea of kind of this became the basic idea, an argument for basic human rights that we were struggling to aspire to even today. when Eric tried to get the website for Four Freedoms, it was taken, and so they said you can have FOR freedoms. And we were like, well, we're Four Freedoms, aren't we? And it became a pun that's like challenging us to be four freedoms that are yet to be even determined. There are a lot of things that even were cool and were unthinkable actually in 2016 that are normal today.
Like
and
which ones would you?
Which ones would you?
Yeah. Oh, well, four freedoms. Which ones are unthinkable?
I mean, meaning that there are more freedoms.
Yes. Yes.
The challenge is to be open to moving from our fixed position in this moment to the next, and to be open to the new freedoms. And so in 2021, we started thinking about the freedom of awakening and the freedom of another justice and the freedom to have deep listening, and how we could actually think about various other ways to kind of reimagine what freedom could mean.
And being open to other people's aspirations when it comes to freedom. And so there are some, so we're running through some images of billboards.
So this one always gets people mad.
Is anyone really mad right now in the audience?
All Lives Matter.
All Lives Matter. There are some from Des Moines.
This one was in Des Moines, and they actually, what I also think is really powerful about an artist's work is like advertising is meant to be relevant for the time, for that moment. But what I find so amazing with these artists' work is that it seems to always be current, or always have. Because what we do as artists, we live in the future. Nothing we make is for now. It's literally for some time in the future, which we don't even know what will be there. And it's a message in the bottle to the future. And so it's really exciting to get to see these. These are a remake. We remade Rockwell's Four Freedoms to represent a more heterogeneously empowered country.
Did anyone see these in Des Moines? Is anyone recognizing the billboards? No. Consensus of silence.
So in 2018, we did this thing. We did this campaign called the 50 State Initiative, and Tom Sachs, who I think has a piece downtown, where we learned actually through a residency at MoMA, PS1, that part of the reasons that museums like this exist is because it was founded 75 years ago, and the Museum of Modern Art in New York felt it needed to proselytize for modern art, and that it would literally loan out its collection to different places all over the country, especially the Midwest, to kind of show what modernity should be and should mean. And I didn't really think about that. The reason that you guys have this, like some of this amazing work, is because, and even this building, is because there was an idea of what modern art could be, and there were people advocating for it. And so what we thought would be really exciting is to kind of use that same idea of cultural spaces as kind of hubs, but also public space as hubs to do. So we did, I know that we did billboards in all 50 states with over 100 artists, and we did over 120 campaigns and events all across the country, and it was really exciting.
Did you encounter any problems around censorship? So I noticed Lamar, the corporation Lamar, under many of the billboards. Was there any attempt to regulate or change? Yeah,
there were about 10 billboards that were censored throughout we've done, I think, 600 billboards since then, over the past 8 years. And yeah, maybe 20 of them have been censored, and that's definitely something that we think about, because obviously like that I think that, well, what we don't have, like, it doesn't say, that's why it says paid for by Four Freedoms, because one of the things that they wanted, at first we just wanted to have the work up, it doesn't say the artist's name. This is Richard Moss. But the billboard companies needed to absolve themselves from whatever message it was because they didn't know what it meant. So they got us to put paid for by for freedom. So it has this kind of suggestion of political language.
Dear Lord, disobedience is a true foundation of liberty. So here we are at Hope 2011.
Yeah.
And in search of the truth. You want to talk about the truth booth?
Yeah, I've been told I'm full of hot air. Because I've always felt it was important to leave space for, to believe that the opposite of my truth could also be true. And I've done that in various ways, but one project I did as a collaboration with Ryan Alexiev and Jim Ricks was called The Truth Booth, and it was a modern day confession booth where people would go and, we should have had pictures from it, because it came here too, but I wasn't on the tour when it came here. This was South Africa, and people would go inside and they video record themselves saying the truth is. And we took it to South Africa, and the next slide is, that's Hamtramck, Detroit. Then this is Baum in Afghanistan. This is in Philadelphia. And there is this kind of really beautiful, I call this a generosity project, where we're actually, as we're creating space for people to share their truth. And when people participate or listen, they actually are being generous to another person who they may or may not appreciate or agree with, but they actually are providing space for.
And so you...
In 2016, this booth went to 35 states.
And so you record these confessions, these responses to your prompt, and have you ever... What's the fate of those videos?
There was a video installation oh my goodness, my brain. Outside of Detroit, at the Cranbrook Institute. There was another one up at Next Haven. The videos are often edited and put up, but if you go to insearchofthetruth.net, there's a selection of the videos that are there. It seems like this project is relevant more than ever now. But what was really one thing that happened since then, because we've been wanting to put it back out, is the invention of AI face masking that can and also all the ways in which you can't deep fakes. You can't really trust a video anymore to actually be even the truth. So even the question of doing a truth booth in this context is questionable.
Were there any common themes in the truths that people shared? Did they seem to want to gravitate towards personal truths or philosophical truths, or was it really
a broad spectrum?
Huge, yeah.
And also when and where, during the 2016 campaign, depending on where people were, they were sharing a truth about whichever political candidate they thought was important.
And how did this come about? How were you able to install the truth booth in Afghanistan? And was there any kind of cultural, obviously there was a linguistic translation, but was there any kind of cultural, social translation that you needed to do to make the project?
And I wasn't there for this. I think that maybe Ryan there, but in Afghanistan, they took it to 11 sites, and it was part of a human rights group's mission, and they had crazy security and were given access to these sites that now you couldn't go there and do this. And women were speaking about the importance of education and democracy, and people even challenging the truth and if it's possible in their country to have a truth. It was really powerful, and we've translated, and a lot of those are up on the website as well.
In that case, speaking the truth comes with real threat and danger.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it always does.
Mm-hmm. Yes, no, that's true.
And so, in New York, these statements are, the truth is I love you, the truth is I hear you, the truth is I feel you. And there's placards that would teach people how to say those. On the other side, it was top 24 languages spoken in Brooklyn. And then there was a way to kind of pronounce it phonetically. And this idea that if I could say something even poorly in your language, it would be an opportunity for us to connect.
There was a question I wanted to ask about In Search of the Truth Booth, but there is, I mean, you mentioned that you didn't travel to Afghanistan, maybe you weren't able to or weren't comfortable, but in this and many other projects, you don't just share authorship, sometimes you have to relinquish it. So your authority over the work of art, whatever it is, disappears once it's out of your grasp. And so, so what does that feel like? I mean, when
Feels good.
Feels good, yeah, okay.
I mean, of course, like in retrospect, I mean, actually, that's how I wound up going to Burning Man.
Is that the aspiration, is to make something that other people...
Yeah, it's about generosity, and I mean, I can have an idea, but if other people don't participate in it or make it their own, it's not worth anything. So even me going to Burning Man for the first time, for some reason, because after Afghanistan, my collaborators were like, let's go to Burning Man, and I was like, I'm not missing Afghanistan and Burning Man. And we tried to take it to Burning Man and put it up, and the universe did not think that was a good idea. It was easier to put it up in Afghanistan than Burning Man. And then I had to learn, I had a totally different experience, which led me, 4 or 5 years later, to come back to Burning Man with another project.
Has there ever been a moment when when authorship has slipped away and that has caused you some frustration or disappointment or...
Yeah, all the time. I mean, yeah, I think that's the nature. I think one of the things I struggle with within my collaborations, which it is what it is, like I'm not in charge. I might have had an idea, I might not have had an idea, I might have had some input, I might not have, but there are usually, like for Freedoms, there are like 7 leaders. And so I don't know what percentage that is, but not what I would like it to be. But I think that's also life, right? And so sometimes I'm accountable for things that I had nothing to do with. Sometimes I get credit for things that I had nothing to do with. But I'm much more interested in kind of the impact of the work than I am getting a gold star. And so then these are benches that we made, where the people who sit and type inside the bench become kind of a statement and become part of the work. And I really just love the way that the benches function as frames. And then there's this kind of playfulness and intimacy. I think there's a couple more that that these were installed in the Rockefeller Center.
And then the shapes are, I mean, the previous ones were based on the speech bubble, but these also remind me of that.
The yelling one. And
yeah, but this is this one in particular reminds me of that graphic device that you see in comic books and
Ow.
graphic. Yeah. Wow, yowza, or something like that. Yeah. So I really wanted us to spend some time talking about Raise Up, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, part of the Equal Justice Initiative project in Alabama. And here you see some of the recurring iconography of the part body, the fragmented self, but the uplifted arms sort of reaching towards freedom and justice. And I think this is incredibly powerful, and so I thought, love it if you could talk about it a little bit.
Thank you. And so, yeah, in Montgomery, Alabama, there is a place called the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, and it's colloquially referred to as the Lynching Museum. And it was the brainchild of a civil rights lawyer named Brian Stevenson, who wrote a book called Just Mercy, which was also turned into a book. And he understood the power of art and placemaking for storytelling. Being in Montgomery, Alabama, where the bus boycotts were kind of transformational, and you could think of those as performance. And thinking about all the Confederate statues that he grew up and spent time around, he thought that there were other stories that were important to be told from that time, and that if we can't acknowledge and make a place to mourn the thousands of people who were lynched in our country, we won't actually be able to kind of contend with it and maybe even repeat it. And so this work of mine, Raise Up, is one of many sculptures on the grounds of the memorial, and I feel like it's kind of like a brushstroke in Brian, the artist, as civic leader artwork.
I think of that block. What is is it bronze?
This is bronze.
The figures are bronze, and then the block is
Concrete.
Concrete.
Concrete, inspired in part by this.
Oh yeah, I am Pei. I read that concrete as a prison, but there's also I also read it as water, that the figures are kind of emerging or sinking, and there's this undecidability to their fate. I think that, yeah, is especially poignant detail. And then it bears the imprint of the wood around that was used to cast it. Unity 2019. Yeah,
and this is another kind of way. When I put this up in New York, it's at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge. It's a 22-foot bronze sculpture. And the news asked me, ABC News, it's like, well, this is a symbol that ISIS has been using. So is this a tribute to ISIS? I was like, how is it, like, how could a reputable news agency think that a sculpture that was put up in New York City in 2019 that took years to make be an ISIS reference? But and that's just to tell you kind of how absurd it is, because I was on the news trying to talk about how I'm not a supporter of ISIS. But the piece in 2020, during COVID and during the kind of moment of awakening across the country around racial justice, this piece actually became a place of coming together across various different cultural kind of communities. And it was really powerful to see people kind of marching past this piece called Unity with the spirit of collective healing.
The story that you just told about ABC News makes me think about the precariousness of any work of public art, not just physical, but also conceptual and thematic, because you just lose, as soon as it steps outside of an art space where it's at least somewhat protected or its message is somewhat protected, it sits on a street or faces a street, then it becomes a victim to that sort of, low bar.
And I think it should be challenged. I mean, all art should be criticized and critiqued and challenged, but I also think that we should be leery of what agendas are at play to make us skeptical and suspicious. So this when I originally wanted to make these Four Freedoms remakes of Rockwell's images, I went to Time magazine and I asked them if they would put it on the cover. I thought it'd be a really great idea, and they were like, nope. And so I felt bad, and we made the images anyway. And then, I think 4 months later, they were like, hey, we would love to put your image on the cover. And that kind of was really a lesson for me about kind of how I could almost, when I talk about living in the future, there was this idea of how I can make something and where it would belong. And even the people who had the ability to make that happen didn't see it until, and I think this was, November 20th or 26th, 2018. So right after the midterm elections, and the question became who gets to be an American. But then actually an artist, a fashion designer, Prabal Gurung, actually did his next fashion campaign inspired by this. And so we asked him the next campaign to do a billboard. So it had legs. And this work was actually later acquired by the U.S. State Department and the Hirshhorn Museum. And so the reason I was awarded, in part, the Medal of Arts by the U.S. Embassy, Art and Embassies, was this work that is on display in Portugal and other places, in South Africa. Another thing we could never have anticipated was that our work would be on the steps of, so this is Federal Hall, which is on Wall Street in downtown New York. This is actually the original site of the American government for the first year. And there's a statue of George Washington there, and they reached out to us and asked us if we would put our work as banners on the front of this building, which is kind of, again, could we have ever imagined that our work would resonate in that way? This seems really relevant of the moment. You know, can we let love quiet fear? There's so much, one of our prompts with Four Freedoms is to be visionary, not reactionary. And because we feel like sometimes we react before we actually even see what or understand what's going on. And once we react, it's almost, you can't take it back. And so this mindfulness is really hard to maintain in this moment. And when people are yelling and threatening and harming your loved ones, it's very difficult to find love. But we know from history that revenge begets revenge. And while violence is a part of the human experience, it typically leads to devolution. And so that this is kind of this desire to put messages in the public space that and challenge us to kind of stay in our hearts is really important.
Jill, how much time do we have left? Good. I was just wondering if I should start fast forwarding through the
fast forward.
I didn't want to do that though.
This is an artist by B. Mike. A billboard by an artist in New Orleans, B. Mike, Brandon B. Mike Odoms. We are our ancestors' wildest dreams, which I really love that statement.
And were these contributed by?
This is at the Brooklyn Museum.
Freedom from hate, freedom from fear, freedom from politics, freedom from Trump. And is this the residency at the Brooklyn Museum?
This time, we decided in 2020 we wanted to do a congress where we would kind of invite artists from all 50 states and arts administrators as delegates. I don't know who came from Iowa, sorry. But there was somebody from Iowa, I promise you that. We can find out. But we did this congress at the LA MoCA and Hammer Museum where 500 kind of delegates came to talk about kind of what the role of art and civic life in that year would be.
This is the Congress as well?
Yeah, there's Klaus. And then a campaign that we did in 2020 was called The Wide Awakes, inspired by a 19th century emancipation movement where people thought that it was time for slavery to end and that there were no candidates willing to do that. And so they kind of decided that they would be kind of the rabble-rousers for freedom. And they kind of chose a candidate by the name of Abraham Lincoln to be their messenger. And actually, through their campaigning, put him in office, took him from obscurity to being a presidential candidate who made significant change. And I think a lot of us were looking for hope and freedom and emancipation in 2020, and a lot of people were rightfully out in the streets expressing anger and frustration, but we thought that was important to find places for civic joy, civic participation through play and thinking about community and how kind of we could reimagine. There were so many amazing ways people were using creativity to enhance our lives, and that kind of that really sad time, and that was one of the ways we did that.
I also were you thinking about the carnival and the carnivalesque and traditions of festival, which are about joy but also about catharsis and
Definitely
release?
thinking about, especially, I mean, I've gone to Trinidad for Carnival a lot, and how those carnivals, also like Mardi Gras, were often inspired by kind of slaves who were kind of challenging the status quo and finding, I mean, to be able to maintain your humanity throughout centuries of subjugation is unthinkable for us. But my ancestors did that, and part of that was through actually channeling the deep spirit of emancipation and freedom that can never be suppressed. And we hear that in the music, we see it in our culture, and that definitely was part of it.
I also love the insistence that play is not opposed to politics or action or progress, that they're...
Yeah, and I think one thing that happened, I think right after this, which when you talk about failing, I was just like, because then the kind of the anti-woke thing happened, and the reason that it was called the Wide Awakes, that we were inspired by the Wide Awakes, was because being awake is something that you can only be in the present moment. Being woke is something that it's kind of like you get a badge. Like I'm aware I did that, so now I'm woke. But this idea of being awake and recognizing we all fall asleep, we all lose our attention, we all forget. But when we're wide awake, we're not living in fear and living in frustration and animosity, and we're realizing that creativity can open all of these doors. And one of the things that happened through that project was one of the people, we all gave ourselves new names. My name was Mr. Beautiful. The person on the right, he gave himself the name The Super, S-O-U-P-E-R, because he likes to make soup. And his partner, we called her Hickey Love, because her last name was Hickey. They were like, well, why don't we do a soup kitchen? And I was like, okay, how do we do that? And they're like, well, can we rent a soup truck? And then the one person called up some galleries and some artists, and we're like, will you donate this much money so that we can hire a soup truck and then go to soup kitchens in places where people aren't getting food and feed them hot food, and they were getting food from restaurants that were that had waste, but also making great food, and fed thousands of people throughout like 6 months, and this idea of wearing capes, us being our own superheroes, was really a critical part of that. And that's the beauty of letting go of authorship. It was just that I could have never imagined that. And then, strangely, again, we wound up, we on October 3rd, which was the day of this really huge Wide Awakes March in 1860, we marched from the top of Central Park, which is where the 5 boys who were incarcerated and falsely accused of raping and brutalizing this woman, entered Central Park. From the top of the park, we marched all the way down to the bottom, to Wall Street, and did an impromptu concert next to the George Washington statue, which was like amazing. And so there are other images from that. Eric Garner's family allowed their artist JR, a French artist, to make these images of his eyes that were part of the march at some point.
How does this material exist in the world now? Have you archived it, collected it, saved it?
Would you like to?
Yeah, well, but I mean, this is living history, and I guess as an art historian, I do think about what persists afterwards. How do we study this? Can we study it, 50 years from now?
I think it's
beyond
important to
just
find
images.
a way to do that. Yeah, and Sanford Biggers, another artist, as far as I know, did and University of Wisconsin-Madison, he did a Wide Awakes thing.
Oh, I heard about it.
A couple, 6 or 7 months ago, and none of these projects, even for Freedoms, were meant to be owned by anyone. They're just ideas that are hopefully put out in the world that others can channel that spirit to do something new with. These are people wearing capes.
Mm-hmm. Recognize some of those people.
And this is a sculpture in O'Hare Airport that I did with my collaborator Kobe Kennedy, called Reach. And again, it's just, that's all I ever want to do, is connect with someone. Love overrules, or love rules, is my motto. And then
Great transition, yeah, to the embrace.
Yeah. And this monument to Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King, the Embrace, is a 20-foot monument to love in Boston Common, which is the oldest continuously used public space in the country. And virtually every other monument there is a monument to a hero of war or a person who died as a result of a war. And I think, we reap what we sow. If what we've memorialized is the history of violence, that is what we will continue to get. And so part of the proposal of this work is that we can take from the concept of family love and how that ripples out into communal love, which Dr. King and Mrs. King sacrificed everything for. This is a picture of him and her when he received the Nobel Peace Prize. And looking at this picture, I realized how much of his weight was on her shoulders. And I thought that was a really powerful metaphor for their relationship. How his legacy, most of what we know about Dr. King is because of what she did after he was gone. And to think about how they sacrificed everything, but she continued to stand for peace and love and justice and community. And I really thought that they were monumental people. But I also realized that I wanted that each of us has that potential, not only with our romantic partners, with anyone we choose to embrace. We can have that kind of ripple effect on society. And so this work, when you stand in the middle, there's like an oculus. You can see the sky, and I had this really wonderful experience when we opened it, to be there with their only grandchild, Yolanda King, and she was like, I feel like my grandparents are looking down at me through this portal. And again, I could never have imagined when I had the idea that these realities would become real. And it isn't me, it was the people pushing papers in City Hall, and there's the welders and like the masons, and all of like thousands of people went into making this work. I just happened to be one of them.
Have you read the book by Judith Butler? It's called Giving an Account of Oneself.
I will.
It's a beautiful book. It's about ethics, essentially. And one of the opening lines of that book, it might be the opening line or close to the opening line, but she's talking about subjectivity. So what is it that makes a subject, a person, a person? And what she argues is that other people make us who we are. Mm-hmm. And so the line in the book that I love so much, it reads, I am my relation to you. And so what she postulates is that we are all not just single individual beings, but we are our relationships with everyone in our lives, people we know, people we don't know. And I see that embodied here in this sculpture, that there is so little difference between the two individuals, that their two bodies become one, and the existence of Dr. King depends on the existence of Coretta Scott King and vice versa. So they are their relationship to one another.
Right, and someone looked at this and they asked me, like, did you like, can you go back one? They were like, did you mean to make a heart there? And I was like, no. Yeah. And then someone else looked at it from a different angle and like, did you mean to make it like an Irish love knot? And I was like, yeah. And then other people saw other things. I was like, no.
Yes.
but again, it's also, they become like yeah, the work is a reflection of how you see the world or what you see in the world. And I looked at it 1,000 times and could never have seen a heart, you know? And that's what I mean by giving space for others to thinking about this work, it's the largest bronze sculpture in the country, which is crazy to think about. But it's also will likely be here when all of us are gone. Like it will, if humanity survives, if this will be a message that our generations are sending to the future. And I imagine, like, I do have this dream of like being there with my grandchild or being there in spirit with my great grandchild when they get to go and see this piece.
Beautiful.
And
This is the last
please
image.
do
Please.
remember me.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I just before we open it up to questions, wanted to say that I appreciate your work so much. Because I find it deeply and authentically ethical. Its message is often revolves around ethical concerns and relationships, but also the way you operate in the world as an artist, and the way you realize your projects is also inherently ethical. And so I think that you're a real model. Really, I'm happy to have you here.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
So Jill and Laura are going to help us with questions.
I'm so happy you were all here to hear that wonderful discussion. So thank you both for taking us through that journey. We'll take a few questions. If anyone would like to raise their hand, we'll pass a mic through and can ask some questions.
Hello. First, thank you for coming, of course. And through all of your projects, one question that I had, and I'm sure many other people in the room had, is how do you manage the message inside a traditional art space like a museum or gallery versus outside where you do so many public projects that can be experienced by different type of folks?
That question, I think, is for you. Why don't you answer it
He
first?
asked it for you.
You
To
first. I didn't get to ask any questions, so this is your chance.
Well, I guess I was thinking about that earlier when I mentioned the precariousness of the object when it's out in the public sphere. And so when work is in the museum, I mean, this context already sets limits, I think. I don't know if it sets limits on what something can mean, but at the very least, it identifies it as a work of art, and if it's depending on how it's installed in the gallery, also situates it within a history of art. So you have the assistance of the curator, the wall label, all of the other, the juxtaposing objects, and it kind of anchors it, I think. And but it's more of a free-for-all when it's out in the world, which is exciting, I guess, but also frustrating. Some of the feedback that you've received has been so far off the mark.
Yeah, and thank you.
I'm just guessing.
I was actually trying to get you to answer about you, but but yeah, I find it very difficult to be authentic in this moment where I never tried to make a living as an artist. I thought that was impossible. I never thought that. And my mother is an artist, an art historian who's very successful, but when I was growing up, it would never have occurred to me that like I could do this for a living, and I made work for that with that in mind. Like I'm never gonna make a living doing this, so it doesn't matter what I make, And I think what happens when someone buys your work is you start to think, what else will they buy? And when you start to think like that, it's much harder to keep your integrity. And I think one of the things I like about public art is that you can't really make money doing it because even if it's a huge budget, it takes 5 or 6, you think you get a $100,000 commission for a piece and it takes 5 years to make. That's $20,000 a year. And sometimes that there's a global pandemic and it takes 7 years. And so, but in a weird way, it can be more sincere, because like even the way the museums function now, that are often in competition with private collectors and also or inspired by the wishes of private collectors, it doesn't always feel that like if I make something that is the most me and important for an institutional purpose, that it will be seen and valued as successful. And so I navigate that a lot more than I would like to.
All right, we have some questions up here.
Thanks. This is sort of a basic question, but kind of two parts. Do you come up with an idea and present it, or do you have to bounce the idea off somebody before you're commissioned to do a piece? How long does it take to come up with an idea?
Usually a lifetime.
Really?
It takes to come up with an idea, and then it takes courage and stupidity to put it out in the world, right? Because not every idea is a good idea, and once you if you make it, you're like, oh, that wasn't a good idea. It's too late. I do a lot of artists I know and respect. They're like, I don't want any feedback, because they feel like they're channeling something that's like so clear. And for me, I really gain a lot from getting other people invested in it and asking me questions and challenging me, and also giving meaning to the work that that kind of enhance my original intent or fortify it. Because sometimes I'll ask someone when I want to make something, or when I make something, it's like, does it suck? And I ask it specifically that way because people are typically inclined to try to find something nice to say. And so how you respond to does it suck says a lot. It's like, no, it doesn't suck. And how I feel in response to that says something. Because sometimes people say that, and I'm like, oh, great, you think it sucks? I love it. But sometimes if they say it sucks, and I'm like, they might have a point. That's when I'm like, okay, this is not, you're just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something will work. And so that's part of my own authenticity process with the work.
And there was another question. Pass that.
I was just wondering, when you're taking like past works and past images and kind of using them within your own work and reconstructing them and like referencing them, what are some like key elements or things that you've discovered is necessary to, when using them, is like what is key to like incorporating within them to make sure that these new like ideas or thoughts are like seen within using them, rather than just having it be seen as a reference or a recreation?
I think I studied photography, and when I studied photography, it wasn't really still, even though it was the 90s, it wasn't really still completely seen as an art form. It's an art form, but it's kind of like with an asterisk. And so we always, in my education, we always had to justify everything. Well, I took this picture because of this, and I, you know, there's all of this meaning that was embedded in every picture, and that's how we did critiques. And what I love about conceptual art and conceptual artists and painters is they're just like, I just did it because I felt like it, and like I didn't know why I did it, and maybe that's okay. And so I think for me, it's a lot of unlearning, of like trying to not have to have everything, every T crossed and dot. I dotted? I don't know. And so, but and letting kind of like the curiosity of my subconscious kind of go where it goes. So if I see a Liechtenstein, and I've loved Liechtenstein forever, and I've been looking at Aaron Douglas forever, and then I find out through a random Google that Langston Hughes, who I love, was in an Aaron Douglas piece, and he's got the pyramids, and Liechtenstein's like, I'm like, okay, I guess this is a thing. But it doesn't feel real, really, or worth it until you put it out, until you make it. I made a smaller version, 2 smaller versions, like 3 feet, and only because I had this opportunity to do a show at a commercial gallery was I crazy enough to be like, let's just make it 20 feet, because I would never make anything 20 feet otherwise. And I didn't even have a space to do that up until last year. And so I think I'm figuring it out as I go. And also I think wanting to give myself the permission to be free. to not feel like I have to justify myself and to kind of make everything valid before it comes out, letting it be what it is, and for the public to respond.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just curious about the advertising. Do you look at contemporary ads, and are you inspired by them as source material, and how do they make you feel in terms of the narrative versus the older ads? Curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, so the unbranded series, the last one, ended in 2015, and I like that. 1915 to 2015 kind of spans the lifespan of like printed media in its like heyday. Now we're like really post-printed media, and advertising has changed. One thing that's changed a lot since 2016 is I realize that on social, as a person who's on social media, I'm consuming ads unwittingly, unknowingly, all the time, because there's influencers and they're being paid to put something there, and there's product placement in all these different places. And I'm also, someone will send me a shirt, and I'm like, oh, cool, this is a cool shirt, and I don't know who made it, but like, it's also an advertisement. And so like, I realize how I'm really trying to find a way to, I feel like when I'm on social media or even reading the news, I'm in the matrix, and I'm trying to figure out like how to get out of the matrix so I can see it. And the beauty of being able to look at old ads is that you can look at the headlines, you can see all the other things so that you can put it into context. But it's much harder to do when you're in the midst of it.
In the beginning of your slide presentation, I believe it was around the time of the blue and black color palettes, you had 2 slides, and the second one, I didn't get a chance to really look at that too closely, and I wanted to know if there was an opportunity to see that particular slide.
I think it was an image of two dancers.
Yeah, but then when you were talking about images within images, when I looked at it the first time, I seen one thing, and then just as I was getting ready to see a couple other things, then you moved past it. And by the way, the absolute bottle as the slave ship, that was brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay. No, okay. Yeah, that one.
And so this is based off of a photograph,
Right.
a 1963 photograph by a Malayan photographer, Malik Sidibe, who was photographing kind of pop, high life music and the kind of experience of like Black African modernity and freedom. And it's a really iconic image. It's always stuck with me. And in the context of I've known rivers, I took a line from the poem, which I don't see it there. I think as I danced along the river, I heard the sound of the Mississippi or something, and I wanted to kind of embody that that kind of story with all the images from ranging from the civil rights movement to the mining in the Congo to festivals to the launching of the Apollo 10. Like those are some of the images I can see in the image on the right that kind of make that up.
And we'll take one more question. Laura on that side. Yep.
I'm going to ask such a nerdy question too. So besides being an art nerd, I'm also a big soccer fan, and I know that you use soccer a lot in your work. And I specifically know you often sort of tie it to modernism. And so my question is sort of, are you interested in the global nature of soccer sort of more than other sports, or do you just sort of see it along with, I know you've done works around basketball and other sports too?
The second one. Well, I think, yeah, sports are, again, like the athletes, they're like, if we think about Greek mythology, they're like, they're the titans and the gods. Literally, like Messi is like a god. And there's something about the way that sports allows people to become mythology. Michael Jordan, was born in the segregated South and became and is like a global kind of transformative icon through his ability to put a ball through a hoop. And while that might seem trivial, I think there's something else happening, something majestic that's happening, something kind of perennial that's happening in sports that is very serious, which is why it's there are it's a multi-billion dollar, trillion dollar probably industry around the world. And I like to connect fine art to that because it's also part of that conversation. I like to, and I mean, I can go on and on about kind of how, sports became a central part of our society, and I'm continuing to study that.
Well, I said that would be the last question, and I just want to also tell the audience I had the great pleasure of working around and moving around Des Moines today with Hank, so I hope that you've seen our city. You maybe have some ideas. There are people from public art in the audience as well, and we would be graced to have something by you in our city, and I'm so thankful that you are making the word, as Dr. Baum put it, so thank you for choosing art as your path, and thank you for visiting us tonight.
Thank you, and thank you for all your work.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Hank.